Hello and welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast. I'm your host, Chris Fraser. This past summer, shortly after Will Chernoff had asked me to take the podcast over, we met up for coffee to talk details. Before I was ready to agree to the proposition, I needed them, the details. And Will delivered. We talked for close to 3 hours, as I recall. And by the end of the conversation, clearly the answer was yes. And it was then that once I knew it was going to be my show with my guests, my mind raced with the names of great musicians in this town and other towns that I wanted to feature. As it raced, one name continued to stand out among the others: John Gross. John Gross is a saxophonist originally from Los Angeles, California, born on May 30th, 1944. He lived in LA for most of his life until he moved to Portland, Oregon in 1990. There he lived until 2016 when he and his wife Darcy retired to Vancouver, BC, where he has lived ever since. John has been playing jazz saxophone professionally since around 1958 and is best known for his work with superstar drummer Shelly Manne or with the Toshiko Akiyoshi Lou Tabakin Big Band, as well as his own records as band leader from over the decades. And as you'll find out listening to this episode, John is the musician in Vancouver who is the most closely connected to what some may say is the source of this musical tradition. It was my immense pleasure and privilege to sit down with him on a sunny day in East Vancouver to talk about his start with music, his approach, his philosophy, and his many, many stories from a many-storied career. Please enjoy. Okay, yeah. 2016 is when you got here.
When I got here.
Had you been to Vancouver before?
Many times.
Okay.
Playing the festivals and playing with the people up here.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, you've played a great deal with people here. I mean, even before moving here. So
yeah, I played with a lot of great players. Starting in the 90s.
Yeah.
You know, I was in a band with Pat Coleman, Bob Murphy, and Buff Allen.
Right.
And that was a lovely band. Bob played organ. He played the crap
Oh,
out
cool.
of it.
Yeah, man.
Great organ player.
You know what's funny? The first time I actually played with you and Bob Murphy for the first time at the same time at the jam session at Pat's Pub.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. There was this insane band that they put on stage. It was you and Bob, and Brad Turner was playing.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it was, who was drumming? It might have been Dave Robbins.
Could have been.
Yeah. And Paul Rushka was playing bass.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, and you called Voyage.
Nice tune.
Nice tune. It's a great tune. I didn't really know it yet. I knew it by the end.
The bridge is kind of tricky.
It's a little tricky, yeah. Especially when you're learning it on the fly. I think I got there, though.
It's not subtle.
No, it's not. No.
But it's tricky. If you've never played it, it's hard.
Yeah, it was a challenge. But I think that's why. So the guy who was running the jam back then was, but he ran the jam for a long time there.
Before Sharon.
Yeah. But Sharon was often in the house band. She was often playing piano. And he like egged me on and like got me to go up and play with that band. And I was like, I don't know if I can do that. But he made me do it. He like pushed me. And because I think it must have been in 2016. If you were coming just to the jam session.
Well, I was up here before that too.
Did you ever come to the jam session before you moved here?
If I do, I don't remember.
Right. No, that's fair.
But I was up here playing with Brad
Mm-hmm.
and Tom Wakeling
Mm-hmm.
and William Thomas. We had a little band that we played
Oh, great.
at the Cotton Club
Yep.
and a few other places, and made one record.
Mm-hmm.
It's really nice. I love playing with Brad. He's a terrific player.
Yeah.
It's great.
Brad he gets mentioned on this podcast a lot, just in passing, because he's such kind of a giant figure in the scene. He's done so much. He's so prolific for his age, even.
Yes.
And he's so equally good on piano as he is on trumpet.
Yeah.
He's also a great drummer.
Yeah, I played with him on drums, and piano, and trumpet.
Yeah, he's a
great musician.
Yeah, it's kind of well, I feel like it's a bit of a I feel that there is a West Coast trend of multi-instrumentalism. There's a lot of musicians from the West Coast I've noticed that are multi-instrumentalists.
Yeah, I don't know if it's confined to the West Coast.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, right or wrong.
Yeah.
We're not talking about that.
Yeah.
But there are several.
Yeah.
That, do you know Jay Thomas?
No, I don't know Jay Thomas.
Well, he plays trumpet, tenor, soprano, and flute.
Oh, yeah. Trumpet, along with the woodwinds.
And his trumpet playing is great.
Yeah.
And same with everything he plays.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what Ira Sullivan did.
Yeah.
He played trumpet, tenor, and flute.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was your first impression of him as an instrumentalist?
Who?
Of Jay. Oh, did you see him initially? Because I feel like for me, I always see Brad Turner as a trumpet player, because I think that was my first exposure to him, is that he was a trumpet player. Even though I've seen him play piano many times, I've seen him play drums a handful of times. But like, to me, he's a trumpet player, and I feel like that is kind of something that always happens. Like, even if you're a multi-instrumentalist, like.
Well, because I played so often with Brad.
Yeah.
Him playing trumpet.
Yeah.
That's what I think of him as.
Yeah.
Player. But I've also been with him when he's played piano, and he just sounds great.
Yeah, I think Brad is he's good at riding that line. But I do all I'm saying is that people who are multi-instrumentalists usually are still like pigeonholed into being a instrumentalist. Like people know them people generally know Brad as a trumpet player, or Jay Thomas. Like, what would you say people know him as
a trumpet player?
As a trumpet player, even though he plays the woodwinds.
Yeah, and when he travels a lot to Japan, he's got a circuit there, and when he plays Japan, he plays trumpet and tenor, and his tenor playing is really good.
Wow.
Yeah, and his trumpet playing is great.
What do you prefer?
Pardon me?
Do you prefer one over the other? No.
Well, if I was going to play with him, I'd like to play with him on trumpet. But then again, playing with him on tenor, it would be fun because I like playing with other saxophone players.
Yeah, like in Saxophobia.
Yeah. So I love that.
Yeah. When was the last time you did a Saxophobia show?
We did a thing with Campbell at the Jazz Festival.
Okay, yeah, great.
That was really fun. I love playing with Campbell.
Yeah.
He's
brilliant.
He doesn't sound like anybody else, and he's got a beautiful sound on both instruments.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
On you mean on tenor and alto?
No, alto and soprano.
Alto and soprano. Oh, okay.
And a lot of people don't understand how difficult it is to play the soprano and get a good sound and play in tune.
Playing in tune. That's the number one thing I've always heard from saxophone players.
And he does both.
Right.
He gets a lovely sound on the instrument.
Yeah.
And plays in tune.
Yeah.
And his alto playing is the same.
Right.
It's just beautiful.
Well, I think he's known mostly for his alto playing.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But, his soprano playing is top notch.
Yeah.
He's a great player.
Yeah. Well, I know you've played. Have you played a lot of soprano? I know you've done alto and tenor. Obviously, is your main bag, but
well, I grew up playing alto.
Yeah.
And that was my first saxophone. Was alto.
Right.
And I played alto through my early 20s. When I was 17, I went on the road with Harry James.
Harry James, yeah.
Playing alto. And then I played lead alto with Johnny Mathis for
right.
a couple of years. And then I was playing alto when I played with Lionel Hampton in Vegas in 1967. Wow. So I was still playing alto then.
Wow.
And people thought of me as an alto player.
Right.
But I had been working on the tenor.
Right. So by the late 60s, I mean, were you mostly playing the tenor on your own time?
I was mostly playing the tenor.
Yeah.
But
I mean, if Lionel Hampton asked you to play
I was just
alto.
attracted to it because of the depth and the breadth of the instrument for me.
I get that. Like being able to have that range.
Yeah.
And being able to sort of like express in that register.
Yeah.
Is it's special.
Yeah. I think it's different for everybody, but for me,
yeah,
making the change, I'm glad I made the change, but who knows what happened? What would have happened had I stayed on alto? It doesn't. I can't figure it.
I mean, I think it probably would have been similar. I think you just needed to have those ideas about the alto instead of, or like, those feelings towards that instrument instead of the feelings that you have towards tenor. Like you see yourself being able to express yourself in a certain way because of that instrument in ways that are impossible in the alto, right?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I made the change because tenor players were it was like the most important saxophone at the time.
Right. I mean, yeah, we're talking about the 60s. You have Coltrane.
Yeah.
You have Joe Henderson. You have Hank
all
Mobley.
Of my favorite saxophone players were tenor players.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
So it was more of a challenge because they're so great. That. But when I was growing up in the 60s, the criteria for playing jazz was to develop your own voice.
Right. I don't think that's really changed.
Pardon me?
I feel like that's still sort of what people are after these days.
Yeah. I'm not sure about that because of the way the educational system is set up.
Interesting. Okay.
I think there's some difficulties there for young players, being told, what direction to go to, or being told that you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Instead of like trying to develop their own personality.
Yeah.
What
do you think is an important practice as far as like being able to develop your personality, if there is such a thing?
Well, I think it varies from individual to individual.
Of course, yeah.
But you need to figure out what your musical personality is.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that I found that you could do that is by playing music with other people.
Yeah.
I think that was the key to me developing any kind of musical personality, was playing with other people.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I didn't spend a lot of time after the initial learning how to play the instrument, playing scales and all that, I didn't spend a lot of time playing other people's licks.
Right.
I just didn't do that.
Yeah.
I didn't transcribe anybody's music. I just listened to it all the time.
Right, yeah.
Until I could sing their solos.
Sure, yeah.
And that was important to me. But I didn't write stuff down. You just file it away.
Yeah.
And then the accumulation of what you listen to comes out in a unique way according to your musical personality.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing is essentially developing language, right? Like the way that a child does, they just listen to their parents for the first however many years of their life until they can start forming their own thoughts.
Yeah. And so I listened to everybody. And then the ones I liked, I listened to more.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. So who were like some people that you were sort of incessantly listening to, like in those earlier years when?
Well, when I was playing alto, I would listen. The first thing that I remember is my dad, who was a musician.
Oh, great.
He brought home a Charlie Parker record.
Oh, great.
Little 45.
Yeah.
And Constellation. And it like triggered something in my brain. It's like my mind exploded.
Yeah.
It's like, way beyond my ability to comprehend. I was like 13.
Yeah.
And the first thing I asked him was, who are those saxophone players? Thinking that I couldn't be, it was obvious to me it was like, had to be more than one.
It can't be a single human making all of that sound.
Yeah. And
that's awesome.
That was like an astonishing revelation.
Oh, man, yeah.
I didn't spend a lot of time studying Charlie Parker, just listening.
Yeah.
But
I think that's studying.
He was, he's like Bach, he changed everything.
Yes.
And then after that, I was playing alto, so I listened a lot to Lee Konitz, Paul Desmond, Art Pepper, early Art Pepper, and let me see who else. And that was kind of it. So I developed a kind of a clear style that was like kind of spacious and interesting.
Yeah.
And at that same time, I met Bert Wilson and got involved in, and he showed me my first multiphonics, and I've been working on that for like 50 years.
Well, you've got a book.
Yeah, I have a book.
Yeah.
And that was interesting because it opened up a whole other area of the saxophone. So that was really fun.
Yeah.
We used to play all the time. Bert Wilson,
yeah.
And I was...
When would this have been? In
the 60s.
In the 60s, looking at multiphonics way back then. Yeah.
I got a car when I was like 15, so it'd be like 59, 60.
Okay.
And so I had a car so I could go out and play at jam sessions all the time.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and I met Bert there. And we started hanging out, and he loved the music, and he listened to it all the time. And so I would go over to his house, and we'd play together and listen. And it was like really fun.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time during that time going to jam sessions, playing in young kids' bands, jazz bands, because in the 50s and 60s, there was a real active educational system in Los Angeles.
Okay, yeah.
And there was I played in 2 or 3 kids' big bands. I played in 2 or 3 small groups, all organized by adults or kids. And it was like, and I played in youth bands.
Yep.
Concert bands.
Yep.
And I played in youth orchestras. Played clarinet.
Clarinet.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So my life was like devoted to music.
Right.
Which was...
Well, I guess you said your dad was a musician, so...
He taught music at music schools privately. And my mother played the piano, and they loved music.
Yeah.
So they would, and when they were courting and afterwards, before the war, they would go out dancing all the time, or they would go out listening.
Yeah.
And at that time, you could go hear Nat King Cole.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking the 30s, right?
So, yeah. Wardell Gray, all the great players that were around in LA in the 50s, so that you could go hear them for the price of a drink.
Yeah.
It's
incredible to think about.
They went to see Lee Young, who was Lester's brother. And they told me that this guy walked in with a saxophone.
Yeah.
And it was Lester visiting his brother.
Wow.
And so they just sat there all night. Said it was like amazing.
I mean, yeah. So
so that's where my basis of jazz comes from, is from the people that my folks listened to.
Wow.
And there was always music in the house.
That's good.
Always.
I feel like that's a common theme.
Yeah.
With a lot of musicians, is growing up at least just with exposure to music at like a regular amount. Like I remember, growing up, my parents had like a couple of CDs that they liked because they're music lovers, but they aren't musicians by trade or anything. My dad played a little bit of bass when he was younger. But we had a couple of CDs that we just always listened to. And it was mostly music from the 70s. My dad really liked Motown music and R&B music. My mom liked more rock music, like classic rock music and stuff. And I was exposed to that from a young age, just constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just always listening to just a couple of those CDs all the time. And that story that you had about hearing Bird for the first time reminded me of a similar thing that happened to me. I was visiting my grandparents. My grandparents are they lived in Seattle when I was younger.
Yeah.
And they had my grandfather in particular is a big fan of jazz, and he had I guess it was maybe like a compilation record of like jazz piano music. And one recording on it was In Walked Bud.
Yeah.
By Thelonious Monk.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that as like a kid, as like a young kid.
Yeah.
And my ears perking up to it, and it having a different effect on me, where I thought like, oh, this is really something else.
Yeah.
This isn't like the other music. There's something happening here. And maybe it's like the live aspect of it. It being Monk, like Monk is just he's so evocative, right? Like he's so human with his playing.
Yes.
It's like speech, I find.
Yeah.
The way he plays piano. And I think that really, I don't know, there was something that just sort of like grabbed me about hearing Monk, even just as a kid. And I think that's something specific about Monk, where he is sophisticated at the same time as accessible.
Yeah.
Right? Like where his music, it's not hard to understand.
No, it's not hard to understand.
It's not hard. It's hard to play, but it's not hard to understand from a listening standpoint.
From a listening standpoint, it's right there in front of you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was lucky in that I got to see Monk a lot.
Wow.
In person. At Shelly's. Yeah.
Shelly's Manhole in LA.
And it was always great. It was never like he always played well. He always played Monk. Yeah. He never like phoned it in or did anything. He just played.
Any archival videos I've watched of him, he's sweating.
Yeah.
He's sweating and he's dancing, and he never is not playing at 2,000% effort.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like there's an effortlessness to the way that he plays, because I've never been able to hear anybody perfectly recreate Monk's sound on the piano. A couple people have come close, but there's nothing like the real thing.
Yeah, what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
what's the point? Yeah, a friend of mine was working with him at the time.
Yeah,
Putter Smith, and he loved it. He just loved it.
He worked with him?
Yeah, he worked with him for many months.
This would have been, I suppose, in the 60s?
Late 60s, early 70s.
Was Monk still playing?
Yeah.
Didn't he stop? Well, maybe
stopped playing at a certain point.
Yeah.
But this was before he stopped playing.
Wow.
This is after Charlie Rouse left. And he had another saxophone player, Paul Jeffries.
Yeah.
And it wasn't quite the same.
Right.
Because Charlie Rouse had a unique thing that fit so perfectly with Monk. You know, Charlie played out of tune, and but he really locked into Monk's style in a certain way that was nobody else did.
Right. Yeah.
You know, Monk played with a lot of great tenor players.
Yeah.
But Charlie really nailed it as far as playing with Monk and playing Monk's style.
Like representing his melodic style. I feel like Charlie is a big part of that sound.
Yeah. He was great.
Mm-hmm.
But Putter loved playing with him because he knew that Monk was like a genius.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
he's brilliant. If you look at his songs that he wrote, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, some of those songs are completely, even still, completely confounding to me.
Completely
confounding. Certain things, I'm not sure if I will ever be able to play them. I try to learn Monk tunes, and something like Trinkle Tinkle,
yeah,
I think that's impossible to play on the guitar. I don't know.
Perhaps.
Maybe.
It's very difficult on the tenor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know Coltrane did it, but
yeah, Charlie Rouse did it. A bunch of other people did it.
Yep.
But and I loved the only other tenor player I really loved listening to him play with Monk was Coltrane.
Yeah. Oh man.
You know.
I seem to recall hearing about how working with Monk it doesn't seem to be like working with other band leaders and other musicians. You spend a lot of time together, right? Like I'd heard that Coltrane was basically going to Monk's place every day.
Yeah.
And working on the music together for several hours.
That's what people did at the time.
Yeah.
That's what we did growing up. You played at people's houses all day long.
Wow.
Then you go out and play or work.
Yeah.
But Coltrane came up with he said playing with Monk is like stepping into an empty elevator shaft.
That's good.
You know, in other words, you're playing along and you're doing really good, and then all of a sudden you're falling.
Yeah. I love that feeling though.
Yeah.
I love that I know exactly what that means. Like, you know, the feeling of free fall.
Yeah, of not quite knowing what's going on.
Yeah. That's sort of it's thrilling.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
Because you know, it's playing music is like such a privilege.
Yeah.
You know, and a pleasure.
Exactly.
You know, and I never get tired of playing because I know I'll never get it right. I know that.
That's profound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll play at a certain level and occasionally better than that, and sometimes not quite so good.
Yeah.
But I'll never get it all right because that's something you just never reach.
That's not really the point.
No.
You can't really get expression right.
No.
You
can strive for.
Yeah.
You can have something in your mind that you're striving for and maybe get close and maybe not.
Right.
You know, but I have to go by what the masters have said. Right. You know, somebody asked Sonny Rollins one time what he thought about when he was playing.
I think I've seen that.
Yeah, and Sonny said, I can't think and play at the same time.
Exactly.
So when you're playing, your mind is working, but you're not thinking.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's so strange.
I
can't describe it.
Well, Kenny Werner talks a lot about the mind.
Yeah.
In his book, Effortless Mastery.
Yeah.
You know, and he calls the mind, you know, like a tyrant. The mind is a tyrant. And the more you listen to it, the more you'll believe it. And the mind is always criticizing. The mind is because it's a defense mechanism. You know, we've developed the mind to fix problems, right? In our evolution. And when it comes to improvising and expressing yourself, the mind isn't really actually very useful because what the mind is looking for is problems to fix.
Yeah.
But there isn't necessarily a problem to fix because the stakes are not high when you're playing music. And that's sort of the point. And so if you can quiet your mind and sort of remove yourself from thinking, then the floodgates open of your ability to express and feel and be in the moment.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Wayne Shorter talks about, you know, letting the note tell you where to go.
Right.
And I like that.
Yeah.
You know, following the note.
Well, and that really is just like a good way of saying live in the moment, right? Like don't plan anything, right? Don't dwell on playing something you didn't like that you find is distasteful or something. You just have to. You're playing a note, and then something else must happen.
Well, you're playing a note, and you're playing with other people, so you're listening to them,
right?
And so, what they come up with would dictate what you'll do,
right?
And just like what you come up with will dictate what they do,
right? There's a cycle happening.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I was playing with. I've done this. Asked a few piano players, but I was playing with Mike Wofford, who is a great piano player and accompanist.
Okay.
And I was playing with him one time, and we played a tune, and he played something that really struck me.
Yeah.
So I said, "Well, what did you do there?" You know.
Yeah.
And he said, "I don't know. I was just following you."
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So he was following the music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's always the answer, isn't it? Like whenever you ask somebody what they did
Yeah.
when they just finished playing.
Yeah.
I'm sure you get that all the time where someone asks like, "Oh, what were you thinking just then? Like what was the concept behind what you were doing?" And that's
There is none.
yeah, it's
except to play well and to listen to other people you're playing with.
Yeah. And to just continue kind of the creative output. Just be in a mental state where you can continue just creating.
Yeah, without putting any sort of highfalutin bullshit on it,
Yeah.
Like it's called playing for a reason, because it's plain.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's a game.
It's a game. Yeah.
And it's more than that. It's just fun.
Yeah. It's possibly the first game.
I don't know. I mean, music goes way back before history.
Yeah.
So I think there's been music in the universe for billions of years.
Right. So you're of that mind.
Everything vibrates at a certain rate in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is static ever.
Right. Everything's moving.
So everything's vibrating. So
yep.
What is that sound? What does it sound like?
Yeah. Well, music is time, right?
Well, time is another thing that's interesting. Is there time?
Mm-hmm.
That's then we get into areas in which I'm totally unqualified to speak on.
Right.
Not being a philosopher or
that's what podcasts are for. That's what podcast just talking about anything that you're unqualified to talk about. That's why you make a podcast.
And one of the things that I learned about playing jazz was time, trying to get the right feel.
Yeah,
because if you're playing like straight ahead mm-hmm. jazz, then you have to be able to lock into the feeling of the music.
Yep.
The time of the music.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a while to understand.
Yeah. It's really hard to describe that to people.
Yeah.
Especially if they're not musicians or if they're new musicians. It's I find it very hard to describe that kind of thing to, like, when I have I have a few jazz guitar students.
Yeah.
And when I try to explain feel and like swing feel to them, and it's a completely new concept to them, the only thing I end up telling them basically every time, it always just devolves into me saying like, okay, you have to listen to this record, you have to listen to this record, you have to listen to this record, and you just have to listen to them for, 10 years, and then maybe you'll get it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll have younger players come to me and I'll give them one lesson.
Yeah.
And I'll find a place where they're playing.
Yeah.
And go listen to them and think about what I heard. Mm-hmm. And then talk with them about what I heard.
Right.
And it's the time feel. If you don't have a good time feel mm-hmm. playing the music, then whatever else you're playing is meaningless.
Yeah.
It's not important because
right.
it isn't locked into what the feeling of the music is at the time.
Yeah.
So, and I'll do the same thing you mentioned. If saxophone players come to me, I'll say, well, you need to listen to this person and that person and that person and listen to their time feel and figure out how that works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like the easiest way that I've found to show it to somebody who's a stark beginner is, as cliche as it is, to show them So What from Kind of Blue. and show them the difference in time feel from Miles to Coltrane to Cannonball. 3 completely different time feels, all on the same tune, all in the same tempo. And you can hear how the band, the rhythm changes, or the rhythm section changes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Like, they're leaving a lot of space for Miles, right? There's like, Wynton Kelly is not doing much during Miles' solo.
Yeah.
And then in a similar way, they also leave a lot of space for Coltrane, because Coltrane is just filling up so much space.
Yeah.
But it gets louder there. And then as soon as Cannonball starts playing, it's almost like a different song.
It changes.
Yeah. They're bouncing, right? Like Wynton is playing more chords. He's like being a saxophone section in a big band, kind of like doing backgrounds. And that's one of my favorite just like quick lessons for someone, because it's such a good example of how time feel is kind of a fingerprint almost.
Yes, and how the people in the rhythm section are listening intently on what's going on.
Yeah.
They know about the other person's style right away, so they know kind of what they're going to do, sort of.
Yes.
But they're listening intently.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's one of my favorite records is a Cannonball and a Coltrane,
mm-hmm.
which is just perfect.
Yeah.
It's flawless.
Yeah. It's like they're just the perfect example of what that music was at that time.
Yeah, and the rhythm section is burning.
Yeah.
It's like it's a great album.
Have you ever tried drumming?
No.
No?
No.
Not even messing around on the kit?
No.
No. I've tried a little bit. I used to work at teaching at a Long and McQuaid.
Yeah.
And they had practice like quiet drum kits that were all perforated, like the cymbals were all perforated. And they had like these mesh drum heads. So it was like super, super quiet, but it was still a full actual drum kit, like full, not like an electric kit or something that some studios will have. And whenever I had off time and one of those rooms were open, I would go in and I would try to like play along with some Art Blakey or something. And I think that was really helpful for my time feel, because to me, the drum kit is, I think it's the most essential part of the music in a lot of ways. As far as texture goes, maybe, right? Like you hear someone playing time on a drum kit. That sounds like jazz, no matter what else is happening.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not to disparage the other instruments or the upright bass being played pizzicato, that's really important too. But I think the drums are such an essential part of the instrument. I find that if you take some time to just learn the mechanics of the instrument and understand what the drummer is actually doing, I feel like that can be super, super helpful if you've spent a lot of time on a different instrument that's completely unrelated.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I never did it, but I was lucky in that when I was growing up,
I think you got by.
Pardon me?
I think you got by just fine without drumming. I was just saying, I think you got by just fine without drumming.
Yeah,
time feel wise.
I was lucky in that I was exposed right away when I was young to good young drummers.
Yeah.
And throughout my life, I've played with drummers that were like the best there ever was.
Yeah.
I
mean, you played a lot with Shelly Manne.
Played a lot with Shelly Manne. I played with Buddy Rich. I played with some drummers who aren't well known, but played on that same level.
Yeah.
There's a drummer Steve Bohannon, who died in a car wreck at age 23. but
wow.
he was as good a drummer as there ever was.
Sure.
Somebody asked Joe Zawinul who his favorite drummer was.
Mm-hmm.
And he said Steve Bohannon.
Wow.
Because he had played with Steve a couple of times when he was in town with Cannonball.
Yeah.
And he said that he was my favorite drummer.
Wow.
And then I've had a long-term relationship with Billy Mintz,
Yeah.
who is another great drummer.
Yeah.
And then playing with Shelly was a treat because he was another great drummer who he wanted to play in the group. He wasn't like a showman. He never, like once a month, we'd work 3 or 4 nights a week, and once a month he'd play a solo.
Oh, wow.
Once a month, if not, or less.
Yeah.
He didn't like drum solos for him.
Interesting.
He wasn't it wasn't his thing.
Did he just find that it was...
He just liked playing in a band.
Right.
Finding the
feeling
groove.
of playing with a bass player and just backing everybody up.
Yeah, he loved it.
Yeah.
And, and I got to play with Elvin a couple of times.
Oh, wow.
And I understood immediately why Coltrane wanted him. Because of the feel.
Of course.
It was like the beat was like you could drive a truck through the beat. It was like so open.
Wow.
It was like open, like you couldn't make a mistake.
Right. Yeah.
It was incredible.
Wow. Where do you remember when?
I was just playing at Shelly's and
Just Shelly's.
Sat in with him.
Wow.
And he sat in with us. And what a feeling.
Yeah, man. What a treat.
He just changed. He changed everything.
Yeah,
for drummers, he changed everything.
Well, it's amazing.
He showed a new way to play.
Yeah, absolutely. That whole John Coltrane quartet, everyone in there, just changed everything. McCoy changed the piano.
Yeah, and the quartet that was at its best when Jimmy Garrison joined.
Yeah.
That was the best.
Right.
And he brought something different than all the other bass players. Mm-hmm. He was not interested in just playing 4 beats to the bar, playing time all the way. He opened it up.
Right, yeah.
So that opened it up for everybody.
In a similar way to Elvin.
Yeah.
Just sort of it no longer being just metronomic.
No.
Yeah.
And Billy told me this story, Billy Mintz. He said he was hanging out with Elvin because they lived in New York. So everybody hung out.
Right.
And he was asking about, Jimmy Garrison coming on the band. And Elvin said, they auditioned a bunch of bass players.
Yeah.
With McCoy and Jimmy. And then Coltrane said to Elvin, let's take a walk.
Yeah.
So they took a walk, and Elvin said, get the little guy. Because, that
was Jimmy.
Jimmy Garrison was like 5'8" and 130 pounds.
Oh, wow.
He was a little guy.
Wow.
And
never really
that's what Elvin wanted. Gets the little guy.
Interesting. But he had the right. He just had the right stuff. When the drummer signs off on the bass player, that's when you know. So, and if you're Elvin Jones, you could ask anybody.
And if you listen to Crescent, you can hear that.
Right. You
can hear the space that Jimmy gives people.
Right.
That's fascinating.
I'll have to re-listen to that, thinking about that.
Yeah.
Because I listen to a Coltrane record, and I'm a chord player, so I'm listening to McCoy, and I'm listening to Coltrane basically playing chords on the saxophone. And And that's, I mean, like to me, the time feel is innate. It's just part of the record. But now I really want to re-listen to that and like have that at top of mind while I'm listening.
Well, it's so interesting, and I was in a generation that listened to Art Blakey and Coltrane and Elvin and Miles and all that.
Yeah.
And some of the people who were older than me didn't care for that.
Sure.
They just,
that makes sense.
It wasn't what they thought jazz should be.
Right.
And
well, I'm sure that kind of reaction was happening every couple of years.
Yeah.
Right.
It does happen. And
yeah,
the thing that we forget, all of us, is that somebody coming up with a little different way to play doesn't detract from what went before. It just increases the universe of the music.
Yes.
It's like, I think what Rostropovich said, he said he loved jazz because it was such a big art.
Yeah.
And it is. Every time somebody comes up with something tiny bit different to play, it just expands the whole universe of the music.
Right.
It doesn't change, doesn't invalidate what went before.
Yeah.
It just adds to what already is.
Right. It just becomes deeper.
Yeah.
Right.
It's fascinating. And so, I mean, I hear people get hypercritical about, the jazz education and young players and saying, oh, they play too many notes and crap like that. But they're just doing what is in their heart to try and do.
They're reflecting their experience.
Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, I would get flack from a certain section of of musicians, certain area.
Yeah.
They would look at me funny.
Yeah.
Because I didn't play like they did. I was played a little bit different. But when I started playing around all the great players, I never got that from them.
Right.
Never. Never. The only thing I ever got from all the wonderful players I played opposite and played with was encouragement.
Right.
Keep playing.
Yeah.
Just go for it.
Yeah. I mean, when they hear that you're doing.
I remember talking extensively with Bill Evans.
Wow.
Because he was approachable.
Okay, yeah.
He would talk to you.
Right.
And I would ask him about certain things he did and what he did and all that. And he finally, he said, you have to find your own way.
Right.
He said, I can tell you everything I know about what I did, but that wouldn't be your way. You have to find your own way.
Yeah.
And, I listened. I heard that.
Yeah. That's an important lesson. I mean, and to hear it from Bill is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, he was just another great musician.
Yeah.
Interesting. What a guy.
Yeah. I mean,
all he did was change piano playing.
Yeah. A couple times even.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And his first trio.
Yeah, the piano trio. He kind of
was Scotty and Paul was just a revelation.
Yeah.
And yet, if you listen to the recording live at the Vanguard, there's nobody there.
Oh, really?
I mean, there's not very many people there.
Oh, wow.
You hear people talking and glasses clinking.
You hear the glasses clinking, yeah.
But it wasn't like full.
Yeah.
And the applause was like respectful, but not overwhelming.
Yeah.
And yet they were listening to some of the best shit that ever happened.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people not noticing.
The Vanguard is I don't know what the Vanguard was like in the late 50s, but when I went there, it was definitely a very polite room. It's like not very big, pretty dark in there. And people are very polite. But I believe you. Yeah. They, it was early in Bill's career, that Village Vanguard record. So yeah, it was probably just like another Tuesday night or something for them.
Yeah, it's a pity that we lost Scotty.
So young, yeah.
Yeah. Rumor is that he was working on a manuscript that died in the fire, that his car happened. Really? I don't know if that's true or not.
Wow.
Rumors abound.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, that would make sense.
Yeah.
He was writing music already.
Yeah. Well, he was in LA before.
Yeah.
And everybody knew about him then.
Right. Oh, so he was from LA?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, he was there for a while.
Okay.
And then he was in a trio with Clare Fischer, Gene Stone, another great drummer that nobody knows about.
Yeah, Gene Stone.
And Scotty. And then Scotty left for New York, and Gary Peacock took his place.
Right. Gary Peacock, who is also from LA, isn't he?
Pardon me?
Isn't Gary Peacock also from LA?
I don't know if he's originally from LA, but he was there for he was there for a while.
Yeah.
I don't know where he was born. But and if you listen to the Clare Fischer trio with Scotty and Gene, or with Gary Peacock and Gene, it's quite astonishing. Clare Fischer was another great musician,
amazing composer.
Yeah, and his piano playing was astonishing.
Yeah,
and then he had a big band that was all of his writing. Yeah, he was a great musician, and he had a salsa band. Yeah, Salsa Picante. That was a great salsa band.
Wow,
he loved that form of music.
Yeah,
and really nailed it.
I when I was a Capilano, we had a tribute concert to him, and we played a bunch of his vocal arrangements because he had a vocal group.
Yeah, he did.
We played a song called Tomcat that he wrote.
Yeah,
which was an interesting song. It was, the lyrics are all just like very literal, like literally about a cat.
Yeah.
But the music was amazing. Just like the way that he, like, you could tell it's a piano player, just very like sophisticated harmonies.
Oh yeah. Stacks
of, triads on triads kind of stuff. But I mean, you could tell that he was just like a high output, just extremely smart musician.
Yeah, he was just brilliant.
Yeah.
When he was, friends of mine, piano players, would go study with him.
Right.
And a friend of mine, Tad Weed, who died a few years ago, was a great piano player. He would take a tape recorder to his lesson, so he'd make sure he got everything.
I've done that.
And it would be like an hour lesson that would last for 3 hours.
Right. Yeah.
And Clare would tell the student, take this tune, work it out, come back, show me what you got. And they do it, and Clare would say, well, that's really good, but here you could have done this. And they'd spend hours on that one tune exploring like how many different ways you could have done this.
Wow.
And I thought, boy, That's some deep shit.
Yeah.
And that's knowledge that should be out there, but isn't.
Right.
And that's a pity.
Well, it's hard to, I guess it's hard to, when you're dedicated, it's easy to understand that, I guess. But it's hard to maybe sell somebody on the idea of like, that's how you get good at this music, is you spend hours and hours and hours and hours re-examining the material. Not just learning it, but relearning it and looking at it from every possible angle.
Yeah.
That's how I try to learn new tunes lately, is I'll just sort of work on the same song for maybe a week. I'll just like play it. I'll just keep playing it for an hour straight at a time.
Yes.
And just try to make it feel like it's almost like a natural innate reaction to be able to play the song just on its own.
Yeah, I'll do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's
what I suspect.
I'll like pick a tune and I'll practice it for a month.
Right.
Yeah. Or longer if I want to. And I'll try and figure out different ways to play it.
Yeah.
I remember hearing Lee Konitz talk about teaching.
Mm-hmm.
He said that he was giving a lecture to a class, and he was saying, now, if you're going to learn this tune, the first thing you need to know is what are the common tones going through the whole song.
Right.
And then you start by playing whole notes until you need to change according to the chord. You need to change the note.
Yeah.
And so you wind up playing like 2 or 3 notes for a whole chorus.
Yeah.
And then you do that in every degree of the scale that you're starting with. And then after that, you play, and this is something that I remember hearing Lee talk about it and say, and I thought, well, that's what I do. It's like, it's pretty obvious. It's a very thorough way to learn a tune.
Yeah.
But I would play whole notes all the way through, changing the whole notes when I needed to change it.
Yeah.
And then half notes, and then quarter notes.
Right.
And then 3,
triplets.
Half note triplets.
Yeah.
And, but I would start with the basics to hear the song. And it really helped me understand the song.
Yeah.
Like where are the inflection points on a certain tune?
Yes.
That you need to like delineate or forget, let go,
Yeah.
It's and Lee said when he was giving this talk, he said by the time I finished describing what I did as far as learning a tune, he said half of the room had left.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they weren't interested.
That's what I mean. It's just hard to convince somebody. It's hard to sell somebody on sort of the necessary process.
Well,
and I mean, when was this?
Oh, I don't.
It would have been early.
I heard the lecture on tape about 10 years ago.
Okay, yeah.
But it was like they wanted the quick fix.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you get the quick fix? And there's no way to get that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, yeah, and it's
but practicing is like, when I practice, it's like a famous quote of Zoot Sims.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody said, Zoot, how can you play so great when you're drunk? Completely drunk.
Yeah.
And they said, I practice drunk.
I mean, yeah. So it's probably when he plays best.
And so that the message is, when you practice, you practice playing music.
Yeah.
You don't practice. That's what he's saying.
Right.
Saying you practice playing. When I practice a tune.
Yeah.
Practice a tune like for an hour.
Yeah.
Or I'll practice a blues. Sometimes I'll practice the blues in a different key for a month.
Yep.
I still am uncomfortable with certain keys because of the difficulties of the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll do that so I can get the sound of the pitch, the sound of the blues in that key in my head.
Yeah.
Or I'll just practice playing a major scale every way I can think of to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it might prove useful.
Yeah. Why not? It's good to have that in your back pocket, I guess, right?
Well, it's not like I'll ever get anything right, but it's like I need to be familiar with the material.
Yeah.
I remember people asking, or asking people, somebody will come for a lesson and I'll ask them, well, what's the most important scale? And they'll never get it.
Right.
It's like the most important scale is the chromatic scale.
Well, yeah.
It's so obvious.
All the notes.
And yet they're looking for a deeper thing. And
or a correct answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to do that first.
Yeah. You definitely.
It's funny. But, it's a never-ending art. And it's nice to be part of it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. I'm grateful for every chance I get to play the music.
Yeah.
We're just grateful.
That's the only thing you can be.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've
been very lucky.
I mean, I think it's an amazing thing to have kind of been able to come up at the time that you did in like the history of American music.
Well, that's just the luck of the draw.
Yeah.
I think no matter what time you were born in,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's opportunities to play this music everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, the youngsters now, they've got like another, if they're lucky, another 50 years ahead to see where it goes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting because I can't see where it's going.
Yep.
But they will. They'll make it go a certain way.
Yep.
That they want to do it.
Yeah.
And that's just great.
And they'll just be reflecting their experience again, whenever that is.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about the real pioneers of the music, going back to Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, it's and many, many, many others.
Yeah,
they couldn't have predicted where it would wind up.
Of course,
to this point.
Yeah,
but there was something. It's like Smitty Smith says. He says it's in the air. It's in the air.
Right.
So they sensed something.
Yeah.
And they went for it.
Right.
I mean, God bless them.
Do you feel like you're still learning things about the saxophone?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're a good person to ask that. You've written the book on some extended technique on the saxophone. You've been playing for
a while.
A while. And so I just think that there is a point maybe for some people where the technical aspect of the instrument becomes less relevant. and the you might still be learning, but the learning becomes more more about the music itself.
Well, I think as you get older, you try and pare things down and try and get to the essential aspect of the music, and technique becomes less and less important.
Right.
It's and there are saxophone players nowadays who have unbelievably phenomenal technique.
Yeah.
And that's all to the good, because it's like, it shows other people what can be done with the saxophone. So that's great. But for me, I'm just trying to get to the essence of it. I'm trying to make it simpler.
Yeah.
And it's still interesting.
Was there more of an emphasis on your technique? I mean, there would have had to be early on, but did you find that you were having you had like a deep focus on technique for a period of time?
Yes. Well, you want to get. I remember Bill Green, who was a pioneer in the music scene in Los Angeles. He was one of the first black players to get into the studios.
Okay. Bill Green.
Bill Green, yeah. Mm-hmm. And he taught also. And I took one lesson from him. Mm. And he said, play something for me. So I just played for a few minutes. And he said to me, well, you're playing the instrument really well, but you have to remember that you're not trying to conquer the instrument. Mm-hmm. You need to love the saxophone, not conquer it.
Right.
And I heard that.
Wow.
I was young at the time, but I remember it. Mm-hmm. And so I went back the next week for a lesson. He said, well, let's go have breakfast. Mm. And so we had breakfast. Yeah. And he fired me. He didn't fire me. But, he said what he had to say.
Right.
And that was that.
But that wisdom was an important part for you.
It took me a while to grasp that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the opposite. A lot of people feel the opposite way. I've heard a lot of people who talk about having a relationship with their instrument that is like they're fighting their instrument.
And what are you fighting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I always wondered that too, because I love the guitar. I've always loved playing it, and I think I've always just found any hurdles that I have with the instrument something that's either outside of my control or something that is outside of the purview of the instrument, as far as, because every instrument has some sort of limitation, and that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah.
But I people often, lots of musicians talk about how they fight their instrument. Great musicians, really, really good musicians. But do you think maybe there's issues that
I'm
can
not
arise
one to
with that kind
judge
of thing?
as the people.
Well, of course, yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, when they say they're fighting their instrument, they're struggling with figuring out their relationship to the instrument, mm-hmm. and not fighting it necessarily, but figuring out how best to present their relationship to the instrument, to other people.
Right.
It's, you talk about guitar, and the criteria for me on guitar is what kind of sound do they get out of the guitar?
Mm-hmm. Well, sculpting the sound is a big part of the instrument because you have so much control over it.
Yeah.
There's so many variables, different types of strings, different types of pickups, the settings that you have on the guitar itself and on the amplifier. So many different ways of sculpting the tone. But at the same time, a lot of the best guitar players, it didn't matter at all. All of those things. Like Wes Montgomery, he would just plug into whatever amp was available. He just had his guitar, and he had his very special fingers.
Yeah.
George Benson talks about how he had a corn on his thumb, and that's what he used to play.
Yeah.
He played with his thumb, right? And he had just like a hardened skin on the side of his thumb, and that's where his tone came from, right? So it was literally in his fingers. That's another big thing in the guitar world is some people are like, oh, you need this gear, you need this amp, you need this guitar, you need these strings, you need all this kind of stuff. And then other people will just say, oh, it's all in the fingers. And I think both can be true. It's important to take your instrument seriously and treat it well and like use the stuff that you want to use. It's like any other instrument. You have preferred reeds, I'm sure, but whenever you hear John Scofield playing the guitar, even if he's playing an acoustic guitar, it sounds like John Scofield, right?
How does that happen?
I think it really, but it's like what you're saying, like John Scofield, from what I know, isn't totally particular about his gear because there's a lot of different records he's been on where he's playing completely different stuff. He's known for playing that one semi-hollow body that he always plays, but there's a lot of records where he's playing a completely different type of guitar. And it always sounds like him. And I think it's mostly his relationship to the instrument.
Yeah. And the sound that he created in his mind that comes out of the instruments.
Exactly.
It's internal. Yeah. His sound.
Yeah.
Is, that's why every guitar player could play the same setup.
Yeah.
And everyone would sound different.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like piano, you take 10 piano players, one piano, and they play it, and they all sound different.
Yeah. That's
how do they do that?
Yeah. Like Herbie Hancock. Herbie Hancock, immediately you can tell it's Herbie Hancock on whatever piano he's playing. One chord in.
Yeah, or any number of other players.
Yeah.
Bill Evans, McCoy.
Yeah. Of course,
it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
it's remarkable how one instrument can sound different at the hands of all these great players.
Yeah. And I think piano is the most amazing one to think about because all the mechanism of creating the tone is built
all the
in.
Same.
So it's really just about the velocity and the time feel. I think time feel has a lot to do with it, the way you're filling in the small spaces of time and stuff. But I think you're right. Like working on your relationship to the instrument, I think really is what helps to create that particular sound. Like what you were saying at the beginning, like the most important part that people were doing, when you were coming up was, or the most common thing is trying to find their own sound.
Yeah. And piano players, you can tell right away that they developed a sound in their mind.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there, among all the billions of neurons, they developed a sound that they were able to, through practice, bring out of the piano.
Yeah.
Which is like, to me, it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I could give my saxophone to, 10 other people, and they'd all sound different.
Yeah. Oh, I think something like a horn it's maybe a little bit more. Well, it has to do with the size of your lungs and like the thickness of your lips and
Yeah.
everything, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's more physiological. But but also on the guitar, I mean, like you're interfacing with the actual tone, like the skin on your fingers is interfacing with the actual tone making part of the instrument. So
it's like you can listen to some guitar players and you know immediately who it is.
yeah, exactly. And it's funny, but again, I think of Jim Hall.
Yeah.
And Jim Hall, I don't think he had an adversarial relationship with the guitar, but I know that he thought of the guitar as sort of secondary for him because he saw himself as a composer.
Yeah.
And that the guitar was the scrappy 6-string orchestra that he could carry around with him.
Yeah.
But I don't think he necessarily resented it or anything like that. But I think it was just, he maybe saw the guitar as sort of like the one that he was stuck with, the instrument he was stuck with. And I think I identify with that a little bit. I wish I could play piano better. I wish I could play more than 6 notes sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, every instrument has its limitations.
Yeah.
But, it's fascinating to realize that this form of music is just one of many forms that has evolved throughout the years that is endless in where it's going. You just have no idea.
Yeah. Well, and it's broken off into so many different
yeah.
possibilities.
I mean, if there's anything that the people in the United States should be proud of, it's the contribution that musicians have made to worldwide culture.
Yeah.
It's,
yeah,
it is astonishing.
Yeah. And there's so much that was made that is being made.
Yeah, still.
Yeah.
And that's something that should be a point of pride among Americans, and yet most Americans have no idea.
Right, yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Like you could equate, the explosion of, music, like the music being made, like jazz music and everything that broke off from jazz, like from the middle of the 20th century on. You could really equate that to like the Renaissance in Italy with painting and sculpture.
Yeah. Yeah, and all the different forms of music that evolved just starting at the turn of the last century.
Yeah.
It's astonishing.
Yeah.
And it's because of the mixture of cultures and the little bit of freedom that people were allowed.
Right. Yeah. You mean like after the civil rights movement? Or?
Oh, no. I mean, starting in 1900.
Oh, right.
Or before.
Right.
There was so many different forms of music that developed then.
Right.
And then branched out and increased. It's astonishing. And we don't, in my country, in the United States, we don't respect that.
You don't think so?
No.
Not enough.
No, not enough. Not enough. I mean, these people are really cultural heroes.
Yeah.
I mean, Duke Ellington, my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, then all the other people that were involved in that movement.
Right.
I mean, it's really something.
Yeah.
And I know very little, but what I know is mind blowing. And what I've read about is just incredible.
Did you ever get to meet Duke?
Yeah, I never met him as formally introduced, but I saw the band many times.
Yeah,
many times.
Wow.
I was in Italy in 1970 on the road.
Yep.
And I was playing at a jazz festival on the Italian coast.
Yep.
With Shelly, which was great. And some guys in another band we were playing opposite said, well, Duke's playing down the coast. You want to come and listen?
Yeah.
And I said, yes.
What a place to hear Duke.
You know.
The Italian coast.
Pardon me?
What I was just remarking. What an amazing place to be in the world to hear Duke Ellington.
And so we went down to this unbelievably beautiful seaside resort.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
You know, like you could eat off the street. It was so, it was like just so cool.
Yeah.
And had a great meal. And then it was Buddy Tate and his Cafe Society Orchestra. Mm-hmm. So it was a bunch of black guys. And there was me and Mike Wofford were there. And so we went out to dinner with them, took the bus down.
Yep.
And went out to dinner and then went to the concert. And it was a big ballroom sort of thing with tables everywhere.
Huh.
And so we were didn't have a table.
Right.
So we stood next to the bandstand.
That's even better.
Yeah, which was like so cool. But I remember Paul Gonsalves.
Yeah.
Played Chelsea Bridge.
Oh, wow.
And he did what is called a stroll.
Okay.
So he started playing the tune.
Yep.
Walked down the stairs.
Oh, okay.
Walked all the way around the ballroom.
Wow.
And came back and walked up the stairs and finished the tune. It was like
while he was playing
all the time. He was playing, improvising all the time.
Whoa.
And the band was playing.
Right.
And it was like unbelievably magical.
That sounds mythical.
It was like, you know, I mean, he's a great saxophone player.
Yeah.
But it was quite an experience.
Of course. Yeah.
You know,
that sounds.
It was.
I mean, it sounds unforgettable. That's.
It was, and everybody in the room got to experience that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you had plenty of experience playing first alto.
What's that?
You played first alto in many big bands.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to see Duke's band.
Well, yeah, and to hear Johnny Hodges play so beautifully all the time.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and he
was great.
He sort of invented the sound.
Yeah, and his big influence, along with Lester's big influence, was a guy named Frankie Trombar.
Oh, okay. I haven't heard.
Who played the C melody saxophone and had an orchestra and played in a certain way that both Johnny Hodges and Lester heard.
They tried to emulate
because
that.
You know, you get like a 78 record. It was 3 minutes long.
Yep.
So you'd have to fit all your good shit in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And Frankie Trombar had a band.
Yep.
And I think Bix was on the band too.
Yep.
And so that's how the music got around.
Right.
Not only by bands touring, but by 78s being for sale.
Right.
And people would, they did the same thing until many years ago. You'd get a bunch of musicians together and you'd listen to it and figure it out.
Wow.
You know, and so that's what they do.
Yeah. So like you knew one person who had a record player.
Pardon me?
Like did everyone have a record player, or
most people had record players?
Okay.
Or one out of 10. You know,
right.
There were pianos in the house and probably record players too.
Okay.
But they'd play it until they probably wore it out.
Right. Yeah.
You know, trying to figure out everything that was going on in the music.
Right.
And it'd be like 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Huh.
That was the information.
That's all you get. Wow.
But that's what would happen. And so that was part of the influence of that Johnny Hodges got from people who went before him.
Yeah.
And that was the age of the saxophone in the 20s.
Yeah.
Rudy Wiedoff, who was very popular.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like they were vaudeville saxophone players.
Okay.
Vaudeville. Fascinating.
Huh.
But I remember somebody asked Ben Webster how he learned how to play. And he said, I sat next to Johnny Hodges on Duke's band.
Wow.
And I learned everything I know about playing the saxophone
from
him.
Man. And so, like, did you have somebody like that coming up where they were maybe a peer, but someone who was maybe a few years ahead of you who played the same instrument?
No, there was nobody that was like a mentor. It was more of a group thing.
Interesting.
There were like probably at least a half a dozen and probably more.
Wow.
Of my peers who we would play together and hang out together.
So it was a small
together all the time
community.
Yeah.
Of like-minded players.
Yeah.
And you would all just influence each other.
We would all just listen.
Yeah.
And talk about it.
Wow.
I remember I was on the road with Johnny Mathis, and one of the guys brought along a portable record player.
Okay.
So every night,
yeah,
we'd go and listen to 33s,
yeah,
LPs, and that was a real education.
Yeah.
It was like just so cool.
Yeah. Johnny Mathis.
And then cassettes came out, and everybody had their own cassette, and they'd listen to the stuff they liked.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I guess.
But musicians always traveled with music with them.
Right. Yeah. So like a portable player, is that like one of those suitcase players?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you would find some speakers or something.
Yeah. And I was on the road with Stan Kenton one time. And, we had a night off around Pittsburgh. And so somebody said, well, Max Roach is playing at this place. So we hopped in a cab and went there. A place called Crawford's Grill.
Okay.
Outside of Pittsburgh. And we heard Max. And I think it was Charles Tolliver.
Okay.
And a bass player. It was like just a trio. And there was hardly anybody there. But we stayed all night, and then we asked the bartender to call a cab, and he said, no cabs come out this way at night.
Oh, good to know at the end of the night.
Yeah, I don't know how we got home, but I think somebody gave us a ride to the hotel.
Oh, that's good. That's fortunate.
But at that time,
glad you made it.
In my 20s, I was consumed with, listening to everybody.
Yeah.
I remember having a night off in New York City.
Yep.
And in one night, I got to hear the Coltrane Quartet.
Wow.
Charlie Mingus' band.
Okay, yeah.
And Clark Terry.
Wow.
In one night.
Ooh.
It was a Tuesday night. And it was
just in Greenwich Village, like hopping around, or
just the half note, the Vanguard.
Yep.
And I forget the name of the bar that Clark Terry was at, but it was a well-known place. And that was one night, and there were hardly anybody there for
Wow.
Coltrane or Mingus
Wow.
or Clark Terry because it was like a Tuesday night.
Sure.
So it wasn't
And
crowded.
it was just normal. It was just normal that they were there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was, and other people in the band didn't go. You know, there's only a few of us that went.
Yeah.
But it was well worth it.
Of course.
You know, it's ridiculous.
But I guess, yeah, if it was normal for them to be playing there, I mean, everyone has slow nights.
Oh, yeah.
I
mean, when I played at Shelly's, during the week it would be slow. And sometimes on the weekend it would be slow.
Yep.
Because LA was kind of a art-free zone. It didn't have the culture that other cities had.
Right.
You know.
Why do you think that is?
The business of, it's the movie business.
Yeah.
And so the business starts at 3 a.m.
Right.
And by the time it gets to be 7 or 8 at night, everybody's pooped.
Right.
So there's not a lot of night.
Interesting.
That there is in other big cities.
Yeah. I feel like Vancouver is a little similar to that.
Yeah, it's not as bad as LA was at certain times.
Yeah.
But other big cities I've been to, Chicago, New York, Boston, there was a vibrant nightlife going on until the wee hours.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to work in New York with Billy, and we'd play a gig like Smalls or someplace.
Yeah.
And then we'd go have pizza.
Right.
Or we go have Chinese food.
Yep.
And then we go have gelato. And then we go home. So we'd be back home about 5.
Right. Yeah.
Which is what's great.
Yeah.
Because the streets were full of people.
Yeah, I found that maybe that's the one theory that I have, and that I actually talked about this. I did an episode with John Corsrud.
Oh yeah,
and
a dear man.
Yeah,
such an entertaining guy.
Yeah. I love John.
He's great.
Yeah. And we talk about Vancouver. He's lifelong lived in Vancouver since he was a little kid. And so he's seen how it's changed and everything. And he's, and his theory, which I think holds water, is that because we have such good weather here and such amazing landscape and access to the outdoors and all this kind of stuff, basically year round, that people are more or less like fulfilled by that alone. And we were talking about this because I was in Montreal for 2 weeks this summer.
Yeah.
And I was sort of taken aback by how much nightlife there is there compared to here. And also just, the street festivals every day, people are just crawling the streets constantly. It's I'm not used to it because I'm also a lifelong Vancouverite. And I'm just not used to seeing people out so much. And especially at night, we would go walking and just hear something or see something in the distance and go follow it. And there's something happening just outside. And I'm not used to that. And one theory, and it's probably true about New York and Chicago for sure, is that, in the warmer months, you realize you only have so much time that you can spend outside. And then once it gets cold, you're sort of cooped up for the winter.
Yeah.
It's really hard to, spend all night, being out until 5 a.m. in the dead of winter out in that part of the world compared to Vancouver, at least, And so we take it for granted.
Yeah. Well, I've lived on the West Coast all my life, and I've always known that it's basically, the West Coast is basically an art-free zone.
Yeah.
compared.
Even in Portland? You lived in Portland for 26 years, you said?
Well, in Portland, the reason Portland got so cool when I moved there and before, it was like really cool.
Yeah.
Because it had been bypassed by all the developments in other cities.
Okay.
You could still buy a house cheap.
Yeah.
You could still rent a place cheap. So musicians would stay there because there was work.
Right.
There was a nightlife.
Right.
And there was a black section, which has been eliminated now.
That's what I've heard, yeah.
But it was like very cool. When I lived there were two very good organizations. One, Fear No Music, and the other one, Right Angle Music, that presented nothing but 20th century music, chamber music.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, I heard shit I never heard before.
Wow.
And they would put on festivals in empty buildings and stuff like that.
Yeah, cool.
And then there was the Chamber Music Northwest, which put on stuff all year round. And during the summer, the Chamber Music Northwest Festival was chock full of great chamber music players.
Yeah.
And then the symphony, once they changed directors, became a world-class symphony, playing all kinds of great music.
Yeah.
Mainly modern.
Wow.
And there were like half a dozen clubs I could work at that were easy to get to.
Yeah.
5, 10, 15 minute drive.
Yeah. So Portland's approximately the same size as Vancouver.
And there was a downtown scene.
Yep.
You could walk from one club to another, like 3 or 4 clubs in the area.
Yeah.
And that was like really
like around
cool.
what, the Pearl District?
No, around downtown.
Okay.
Particularly around Pioneer Square.
Okay.
There were places. And there were places in the Pearl District too.
Yeah.
But that was great.
Yeah.
So I really felt lucky and at home there.
Yeah.
And
you were there until you moved here, right?
Yeah.
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 In 2016.
26 years.
Wow.
And it was and because my wife was a music lover, we'd find everything that was going on and go to it.
Yeah.
And she was an opera lover, so
okay.
every good opera that came into town, we'd go see, like we do here.
Oh, great.
And we just got back from a trip to Seattle where we saw an opera there at the Seattle Opera, which is a really good company.
Great.
And we're going to New York in March to see an opera at the Met. We're going to spend a lot of money going there just to see this one singer sing who is great. She's a great singer. And you don't get a chance to see that often.
Sure.
So we're going to go there.
So you're all these shows are going to be featuring the same singer?
No, this one singer that we're going to see back in New York.
Okay.
It's the production that, she's just a great singer, and you never know how long they're going to last.
Sure, yeah.
So.
Do you mean just like opera singers have a tendency to?
Well, I love opera because it's the voice.
Yeah.
I get to hear the voice, being challenged by the music.
Right.
And, the things they do and the sound that they are able to put out is really fascinating.
Right. And do you find, like, is that something that you want to emulate the voice at all with the saxophone?
Well, I don't know if I want to emulate it, but I want to not duplicate it, but keep it in mind about
Right.
the voice is the original instrument.
Right. Yeah.
So if I can somehow get close to that, yes.
Right. Yeah. So maybe emulate isn't the right word, but almost like
it's like be inspired by
honor the voice.
Yeah.
Pay tribute to the importance of the human voice.
I mean, when I hear great singers, it's incredible. I mean,
I was doing a little research. I want to ask you, your Wikipedia page, I don't know who wrote it, but on your Wikipedia page, it says that you played with Gladys Knight.
Yeah.
Have you played with Gladys Knight?
Yeah.
Have you played with Stevie Wonder?
Yeah.
When would that?
Well, that was just a one-time. It was a one-time recording session.
Oh, okay.
And I was there just playing, whole notes.
Okay.
And he was there.
Wow.
And we were playing a song, and the drummer, Paul Humphreys, who was like a top-notch studio player, and he was on the gig, and Stevie was there. And we went over this tune, rehearsals, like there were 20 people playing.
Yeah.
Back in the old days when they did everything live.
Yeah.
And we played it through once, and Paul didn't get it. He could. There was a part that was tricky.
Okay.
So he said to Stevie, Stevie, could you come and show me how this is supposed to go? So Stevie went over, and we played through the chart, and Stevie played it on the drums.
Right.
I was supposed to go.
Yeah.
And that was like super cool.
Wow.
And then Paul got it.
Yeah. Man. So these were studio sessions.
Yeah.
So
I did a few.
Wow.
Not a lot.
Yeah. Do you remember which tracks you ended up
No,
on?
I have no idea.
All right.
I might be able to find the building if it's still standing.
Oh, wow.
But
yeah.
I did some things, but I wasn't interested in becoming a studio player.
Yeah.
First of all, the competition was fierce.
For sure, yeah.
And you had to play like 5 different instruments as good as anybody played them.
Yep.
If you had a chance of making it.
Yeah.
And so that meant that you had to spend every day like an hour or more on each instrument,
right,
making sure that you're progressing
right,
and you're playing at a high level.
You mean like doubling? Like
doubling.
Playing the clarinet, playing the flute.
Playing the clarinet, playing the oboe,
wow,
playing the bass clarinet, playing the bass.
Double rates.
I mean, a lot of those guys played like 6 different instruments, and they played them well.
Yeah.
Really well.
Wow. I wouldn't think the oboe is one of them, but
no, it was in there.
Wow.
Yeah. And then you had to play it perfectly the first time.
Yeah. Man.
And so the pressure was extreme.
Right.
And if you fucked up,
yeah,
they wouldn't call you.
Right. They don't have them
off the list.
They can't afford that.
Yeah.
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 Fuck ups cost tape.
I just wasn't interested in doing that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because you've said a couple times already that you play under the impression that you will not get it right. You can't get it right.
Yeah. Well, in under those circumstances, you have to get it perfect the first time.
Yeah.
So that's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the people that do that are extremely dedicated and gifted.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But it is a different way of approaching the instrument, right?
Yeah. You have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Every time.
I feel like people like that may end up developing that complex of having an adversarial relationship with their instrument.
Perhaps, but I knew all those guys, and they were nice. They were nice people.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't competing with them, so we could be friends.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
They
they were all nice, you know. they knew I wasn't interested, and
Yeah.
so it was cool.
Yeah.
But boy, it's tough. It's tough. It's like playing in a top-notch symphony.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to make a mistake.
Right. Yeah. It's over. Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah.
But that's how you keep your job.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, you can make a lot of money doing symphony work, but it does sound stressful. And I mean, it is a completely different mindset too. I mean, playing in an ensemble. I've played in large ensembles before, and it is definitely a different way of approaching music, right? Because you know that your own maybe instinct to affect what you're playing is not the point. You're serving a larger composition. You're serving something greater. You're just playing one small role in what will end up being something completely different. And you have to be completely at peace with that idea. And I like that. I like kind of having the pressure to be creative not be on my shoulders in that kind of instance.
That's one of the reasons that I enjoyed playing in large ensembles, big bands.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I played like 4 years. I played in Bill Holman's band.
Mm-hmm.
And once you got in,
yep.
Once Bill said, "You're cool,"
yeah,
and you get one chance, he'd call you and say, "You want to come down and play?" And you'd either say yes or no.
Yep.
And then if you did well,
mm-hmm.
he'd say, "I'll see you next week," and that was that.
Wow.
Or not.
Yeah.
And that was a real pleasure because you're sublimating your musical personality to his musical personality.
Yeah.
Which was, his writing was great.
Yeah.
And the feeling of the band was great because it was just full of people who could play their asses off.
Yeah.
And were willing to give themselves over to his concepts.
Yeah.
So it was like a great band,
mm-hmm.
great band, full of great players. And nobody ever made mistakes.
Yeah.
And occasionally I'd be there and somebody would come in as a sub.
Yep.
And, they'd like give them a tune that's featured them and see how they turned out.
Oh.
Kind of old school stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And if they blew it,
yeah,
then they call up another one that featured them, and then another one.
Oh, wow.
And then I never see them again.
Right. So like just putting them in
really kind of cruel.
Yeah. So that's sort of putting them in the pressure cooker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saying, okay, you want to do this? Show us that you can do it.
Yeah. That sounds sounds tough.
It was, but
yeah.
Once you made it past the threshold, then you were just there.
Yeah.
And glad to be there.
Yeah.
Because you were playing at a certain level.
Yeah.
That allowed you to be there.
Right. Yeah.
When I joined Toshiko's band.
Yes.
There was no audition.
Right.
Lou Tabakin called me and he said, "You want to join the band?" I said, "Oh, sure."
Yeah.
And so then he said, "Well, come to this concert and bring your horn and play this number with me."
Yeah.
So I did it, and they were happy enough that I joined the band. That was
Great.
my audition.
Oh, wow.
At a live concert.
Huh.
But that's just the way it was.
I mean, what would you prefer? Would you prefer a formal audition?
I auditioned for Johnny Mathis, and a couple of guys call me to come in and read through some parts.
Yep.
And so they said, okay, that's good enough. That was that.
Great.
But usually not.
Yeah.
Usually. At that time, it was like friends would turn you on to different bands, and you'd go play with them, and if they liked you, they kept you.
Yeah.
And if not, that's okay too. You know, I played with Gerald Wilson's band. I never auditioned.
Okay.
You know. And with Lionel Hampton, I never auditioned. I just showed up at the gig.
What, he just called you, or?
Well, it was a half and half split between New York guys and LA guys.
Yeah.
Playing in Vegas. So I was part of the LA contingent.
Yeah.
And somebody in LA called me to do it. I said yes.
Okay.
You know.
They just needed somebody. They just needed somebody in the LA contingent.
Yeah, they needed half of the band to come from LA. And so it was fine.
Yeah.
You know, but that was the way it was. The same here. If somebody calls you to play a job and they like you, they'll call you again.
Yeah, yeah.
And if they don't, they won't.
Yeah.
And that's the way the chips fall.
Right.
You know, I'm sure there are things that I've done that I didn't pass muster. You know, I didn't.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Right.
You know.
Well, I'm sure that's probably hard to recall for you at this point, right? Like, you know, you probably had so many sessions and.
Well, I don't know who rejected me.
Yeah.
Because
they just never called you again. It's not like someone sat you down and said no.
No. So it's really interesting. But if somebody liked you, then they just call you.
Right. I feel like rejection isn't a big part of the musical experience these days.
You mean now?
Yeah.
I don't think that people play with people that they like to play with.
Yeah.
You know.
There's a lot of musicians.
Yeah.
Kind of anywhere you go, really. There's lots of musicians, and they're easier to find than ever.
Yeah.
With social media and stuff, and so I think it's more likely that you just sort of end up finding the people you like.
Yeah, and that like you.
Yeah.
And that's what you want.
Yeah.
I remember I was playing a job in New York City. I actually went to New York City because the tour was canceled. I was supposed to go to Europe, and the tour was canceled.
Oh.
So my wife said, well, we got 2 weeks. Let's just go to New York.
Yeah.
So I found a cheap place to stay.
And
I called up some friends and got a couple of jobs playing with Billy and Drew Gress and Tony Malaby.
Oh, wow.
And Tony and I had been friends for years.
Yeah.
For, 30 years now.
Yeah.
And we were playing, and he just turned to me and said, you know, I just want to be one of the guys. You know, I said, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to be anything special. I just want to be accepted by my peers.
Yeah.
And I had that, and that's really good enough for me.
Absolutely. I've always had that feeling as well, where it's just like the only people I really care about are the people that I know. And so, like, as long as they accept me as a musician, as a person, then I think that's all I could ever, strive for, really.
Yeah. It's nice to walk into a club to hear people play. Yeah. And have people be nice to you.
Yeah. You know? Absolutely. Yeah.
That's nice.
It is nice.
I like that.
Well, I think you're talking about being part of a community, right?
Yeah. Just being one of many.
Yes. And I think that's not just a music thing. I think that's just sort of any vocation, really. Yeah. Is you just want to feel like you belong.
Yeah.
And in music, sometimes it just means being there.
And there was a book written by a guy named Younger. He wrote a bunch of books, and he did, I think it was called The Perfect Storm or something like that.
Okay.
And he wrote a book called Tribes.
Okay.
About how you belong to certain tribes. And I belong to several different tribes.
Right.
That aren't necessarily one connected to the other.
Yeah.
They overlap, but not necessarily.
Yeah.
So there are certain subgroups of society that I am part of that community. Yeah. And I like that.
Yeah. Well, I think you could say that most people belong to several tribes.
Yeah.
And it's really mostly about recognizing that or embracing that sort of concept of like, this is a group and I'm in the group.
Yeah.
Right.
These are my people.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think it's like one of the most human things to want to belong and to sort of like be recognized and be known. Yeah. And I think it's I know you realize this, but like what a privilege, to be able to be like a member of all these communities, right? I mean, you're a member of the Vancouver community. You've been here for less than 10 years, but I mean, you're seen as an important member of the scene here.
Yeah, well, I like being a member of the community. I like going and hearing my peers perform.
Yeah.
And I try to remember also the kindness that I was shown as a youngster by the people who were important.
Yeah.
And how they were always encouraging.
Yeah.
And I always try to be that.
Yeah.
Because people were that way to me.
Exactly. Yeah. And encouragement, I think, you have, I think, if you're an elder or just like if you're someone,
just a member of the community,
who has more experience, if you're an established member of the community, I think you have a duty to encourage people to be welcoming.
Yeah.
To newcomers, to younger people, or to people who are new.
Yeah, I love going and hearing younger players play.
Yeah. You've played with a lot of younger players in the scene.
Pardon me?
You've played with a lot of the younger players in the scene.
Yeah, well, who else am I going to play with?
I guess.
Well,
younger than you, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of my peers are dead.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Well, I'm 80, so
yeah,
we're fading from the scene.
Yeah, you get to that point.
But I think it's incumbent upon me and good for my heart to go hear younger players play.
Yeah, I think that's
not
a great
judge, just support.
Right.
Because that's what people did to me.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so I have to return the favor.
Yeah.
I have to be part of the continuum.
Yeah.
Of being supportive of the music.
That's great. I feel like there's a sentiment, or there's a stereotype about jazz communities, where there's younger players and there's older players, and the older players like the way it used to be, and the younger players are trying to play it a new way, and the older players are critical of the young players.
Yeah, well, I went from being the youngest guy in the band to being the oldest guy in the band.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't feel I need to tell somebody what to do for their own good.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, weirdly enough, I'm 33. I've gone from being the youngest person in the band to the oldest person in the band at this point. And I love that. I feel incredibly privileged to not be locked into maybe an age group or generation or something like that. I feel it's an incredible privilege to be able to play with people who are 5, 10, even 15 years younger than me sometimes.
Yeah.
And because there's always something you can learn from any other musician.
Yes.
There's always.
I'll go hear younger players, and I'll be on the lookout for anything that they play that I could steal.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's how you learn. You hear something, if it catches your ear, you say, "Oh, what was that?"
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah. There's always going to be something.
Yeah, there will always be something.
Yeah. I'm really happy you agreed to do this. Because truth be told, when Will asked me to start doing this podcast a couple months ago, you were the first person I thought of that I wanted to have on. Just because
Thank you.
I think you have so much invaluable experience, and also we had just finished playing that Hajira's Brew show, Lisa K. Miller's group.
Oh yeah.
8 East. And I remember you telling me a story about Miles Davis playing Shelly's Manhole.
Oh yeah.
And wanting to play both sets instead of having an opener.
Yeah.
and that was just after talking to you for a couple of minutes. So I'm like, oh man, this dude could fill up probably 2 hours, which you have. It's been over 2 hours now. So
well, every time I get a chance to play with Lisa Kay, I'm really glad, because she's an amazing musician.
She really is. She really is.
And she's just incredible.
Yeah.
And we have this trio that we all like. It's with Lisa Kay and James Meager and me. Mm-hmm. And we haven't worked a lot of jobs, but we want to keep it going because it's really wonderful.
Yeah.
And playing with her is astonishing. She's a great musician.
Yeah, incredible facility.
And the larger ensemble that we played in is great.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
It's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. I haven't done very much. She's like introduced me into the improvised music scene here, and I'm really grateful for that, because it's a different gear. It's a different way to use your ears.
Yeah.
You're experiencing time in a different way than you are playing straight ahead jazz, and it's I kind of have the bug now, I'd like to do it again. But we can end it there. Thanks again, John. I would like to thank you for listening to this very special episode. I would also like to thank John for being so gracious and generous with his time and willingness to share his story with me. All I can really say is that I'm very happy I got to do this. If you want to support episodes like this, along with everything else Rhythm Changes does, be sure to visit rhythmchanges.ca and subscribe to the free weekly newsletter, or become a paid member for additional perks. Thanks as always, and I'll see you next time.